Okay. Hi, this is Joe from Beat It with Joe. And today I have the privilege of interviewing Julia Vincent, commonly known as Jules. And she is a springboard diver, a double Olympian, and going to her final and third Olympics in July this year. And after that, Jules is retiring. But that's from professional diving. So welcome and thank you so much for joining me, Jules.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to talk to you.
And Jules is currently in Kentucky and coaches in Kentucky. And and I actually had the privilege of talking to her one young athlete today, and they absolutely adore you. So just there's a little bit of feedback from you. So today what I want to chat to Jules about is her journey from her first Olympics and coming to her third and final. And my first question to you, Jules, if you were your coach back when you were a youngster before your first Olympics, what advice would you give to yourself looking back? And what could you let go of?
I love that question because I actually do have an athlete now that I coach who I see a lot of myself in him. And just from many, many standpoints, but from a mental, like the way that he sort of carries himself, I see myself in him a lot. And so it's kind of fun because I can use my own experience, like how I used to feel, and try to help him through his own, frustrations or competition nerves, things like that. But I think I would, and what I do tell him, and what I would tell myself is that just relax a little bit. This is meant to be fun. And I remember feeling, I think it's normal to feel awestruck going into your first Olympics, but I just remember feeling so nervous about everything. And I felt like everything had to be perfect. And that if it wasn't perfect, it wasn't going to work out. And I think that that's been a huge, that's changed a lot in my life and in my mindset. But I think if I could go back, I'd say, just have a good time. You can do really well, even if you're not doing perfectly. Everything doesn't have to line up for things to go well and for you to have a good time and a good experience. And I think I would let go of that feeling I had to perform for people who maybe haven't heard from me in a while, or I just remember feeling like a pressure to perform for people that I hadn't even talked to in years, but that they would know that I was competing, and I just felt this pressure for really no reason. So yeah, I would definitely let go of that, and I think I've done that now.
Just remind me, how young were you when you went to your first Olympics?
So I had just turned 22 at the Olympics. The day after I competed, I turned 22.
Okay.
I think.
Yes. Jules, and you mentioned the word expectations, and with expectations create pressure. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you had to speak to a younger athlete, preparing for the Olympics, isn't expectations a big one? Like, what are your realistic expectations entering the grand?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because your first Olympics, I don't think you're planning on beating the Chinese. That would be unrealistic and a lot of disappointment to follow.
Right. Yeah, and I definitely, I think I had realistic expectations in that regard for sure. And I think and that is important. You want to have, my whole life I've been such a big dreamer. I don't even care if it sounds outrageous. Like if I have something in my head, that's what I want to try to do. I don't mind to fall hard afterwards if it doesn't happen. But I think there is something to be said about a realistic, realistic expectations going into big competitions like that, because you don't put all that pressure on yourself to compete. You just, to compete well, you just dive or you just do your thing. So yeah, for sure, I think there's a healthy balance between, you got to have expectation. I don't think anyone can go in without a little bit of expectation, because I don't think that would go well either, but there's definitely a balance between the two.
Yeah. And would you say that learning to have fun, I mean, diving is a hugely disciplined sport. You have to do it every day. You have to do your gym training every day. You have to do your flexibility every day, and mindset training and all that. It happens every day. Would you agree? If not every day, 6 out of 7 days a week.
Yep, 100%. And I think that's the biggest thing about probably any sport, but diving, it's such a unique sport where like so many things matter, and again, it's most sports are like this, but with diving, I mean, the mental side is almost more important than the physical side in some sense. So, and then there's a flexibility that you have to pay attention to. So if you don't fall in love with the process, you will never have fun. Like, it doesn't matter how much you love competing, but if you don't fall in love with stretching after a practice, whether you like it or not, like, just fall in love with what you're doing. It's really hard to enjoy the grand moments, like the big moments that you will eventually have. I think you just have to enjoy the day in, day out, the grind. And it sounds cliche, but it's true. Yeah, you just have to enjoy having to wake up. And I wouldn't say enjoy it, but you have to be like, yeah, this is what I wanted. This is what I want to do. Like, not everyone loves to wake up early. That's totally fine. But learning that, okay, this is something that I don't really love, but I love the whole thing as a whole. I love the process. And so I've got to sort of find that mindset where I can kind of love this, this one thing.
Yeah. And we've spoken about it before, but your nutrition is such a huge part of that commitment to your dream.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, meal prepping all the time. Like, I have, I think when it matters that much, it's even the smallest details, like what exactly you're putting in your body. And you have to pay a lot of attention, and you have to put time aside to make sure that you're getting that right.
And timing.
Mm-hmm. Yep, 100. Yeah, going into competitions, what your body, some people don't know, and that's figuring it out. That's the important thing, is making sure you figure it out. But yeah, the timing of when you eat, what you eat, does it sit well in your body? Especially in a sport where a lot of it has to do with, like, you have to tighten up your midsection. So for anything to go well in diving, you have to be squeezing your abs. And a lot of the time, if you don't have something that's sitting well in your stomach, you cannot do that. And I've seen it even in my club divers. Like, they'll come to practice after eating something a little strange, and then their practice is just a wash because they can't control that. And so it's learning how to navigate that part of it, and knowing what sits well with you when you're moving around.
But even you, in your day-to-day, you plan your meals absolutely religiously, so to speak, so that that you've got the energy, but the food is digested before your session. Am I right? It's not just competition time. You do it.
Yeah. So and I can always tell on the days that for some reason I haven't been able to eat when I want to eat, and it makes my practice more challenging to me. I mean, maybe some people really don't have a problem with that. I know my body. I know I have to do that. And I know, when I was going through college, sometimes I felt like I was high maintenance in a sense, because if we were going as a team to eat something or somewhere, I was like, I have to go at this time. Like, I know my body needs this much time to digest. I just know I have to go at that time. Sometimes you feel, gosh, like, am I being annoying? And it's just one of those things. If you want it bad enough, you just have to be okay with whatever people think about you when you're like, this is what I need. I know this is what I need. So.
Yeah, and exactly that. It's the sacrifice and the lack of shame, because if that weren't to happen, then you would have the consequences. So it's kind of being tough and not people pleasing. Again, keeping your dream, your goal in mind.
Yeah.
Jules, you mentioned that the mental part of performance in diving is such a huge part of a positive outcome. So if you have to take yourself back to your first, or the lead up to your first Olympics, and where you are today, how has your mental development grown, and what have you learned, and what could you suggest to others?
It's grown a lot since that time. And I remember, I can pretty vividly remember the lead up into my first Olympics. I felt there was just so much going through my head. I just remember not really knowing how to how to control what was going on in my head, and how to just put it into categories or something, like just organize it all. And I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, I've grown up with ADD. It's gotten a lot better as I've gotten older, but I think a lot of it has to do with there's just a lot going on in my head, and I didn't at that time. I was talking to some uh mental coaches or, you know, mindset coaches, but it was more just what was offered through my collegiate program. And it wasn't super consistent. I think sometimes I thought it made me worse, so I would just ignore it and go and not go back. Which now I know that that's not it at all. But, you know, at the time you don't want to mess with anything, so you worry that if you do that, it's going to mess with something. So now going into this one, I have, you know, I've been working with you doing the gazing red to blue. That's been so helpful to be able, I mean, even yesterday I didn't have a great practice in the pool. It was just, it, some days are just like that. And now I feel like I don't love those days. You know, I can't like love those days, but I definitely feel there's value in those days. And you can't have a great practice every day. You can't be perfect in your mind every day. And I was definitely struggling. And a couple times I was like, you just need to get from red to blue. So just move your way from red to blue mentally. So I would stand in the shower just for a second and just kind of get myself to get to where I'm just diving. I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm not, it's okay if things are not going well. I just need to get my head out of, you know, where it was. And so I definitely think working more consistently and having something to go back to every time I compete has been really, really helpful. And I, like I said, it gives me some order. You know, I don't need everything to be perfect before I go into any competition, but it does help me have like all right, so we're gonna put these thoughts in this box, and then we're going to put these, and then you know, I can write it down, I can work it onto a piece of paper, and that usually just helps me clear my mind.
Yeah, and I think you speak about something so important. When you are having a bad day, or if you're completely overwhelmed, when the pressure's on, is accepting that it does feel uncomfortable or you do feel out of sorts. It's
Yeah.
just recognizing that that's what's actually going on, and then exactly what you did, choosing to focus your attention somewhere else, as in, okay, let's just dive and see how that unfolds for today. In our red to blue process, there's the pre-competition preparation that we've spoken about. Then you've got your rituals and your plans for on competition day. And I know how much you enjoy the mindset cross check, where after performance you can check in, what was your decision making like, what was your execution like, what was your intensity like. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, how you enjoy that and how it helps you go into training with a bit more focus and clarity?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I got onto that, I think it was right before Japan last year, where I started to work on that pre-competition training or mindset training. And it was like putting things into a box. It was just sort of being able to look at my practice when I was competing, you know, so when I was at that new pool, I was able to look at that practice, see how it went. Same thing with the competition. And then it just simplifies everything for me. And I feel like I'm learning that I need to simplify things because there's usually a lot going on in my head. And so if you don't simplify things, it gets really messy. So it's been really helpful. And to be honest, I didn't use that as much as I wanted to over the last 3 competitions. I felt like I was just scrambling at all times because I was on a plane before I really had gotten off another plane, and it just felt like it was a mess. And I think in some ways, like in the first 2 legs of the World Cup I traveled to, I definitely I saw that, like I saw the difference that it makes when I'm not organizing my thoughts a little bit more like that and paying attention to small but simple, you know, things like decision making and my intensity and how I can improve that going into the next practice.
Yeah. And I think what people learn through the mindset coaching is that it's a skill that needs to be practiced, just like you need to practice your hurdle, just like you need to practice your forward dives, backward dives. And if you don't give it the attention, it kind of just slips out until you realize you need it, like you really need it. And so the encouragement would be, practice it often, so that
Yeah.
that it clears space in your head for other thoughts, for other positive thoughts. Would
Mm-hmm.
you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Jules, how do you stay motivated and focused during the highs and lows of training and competition, especially when working towards a long-term goal like the Olympics? And when I talk about the lows, maybe talk, if you can introduce subjects like the relationships that you face on your journey of a professional athlete, because they can't all be good, and when they're not so good, it can interfere with your mental space. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Um, I think as athletes we get really good at compartmentalizing, um, and I know that that's something that I try to be good at. Actually, I know it's not always the most healthy thing in the world to do, but I think sometimes you just have to be able to do that, and you have to decide where you're going to put your energy. And um, if it's possible, you obviously put your energy to just the diving board. The diving board, it's just you and the diving board, and you're working towards being better than you were on the dive before. You're working towards being better than you were the day before. And so I think um, it's really difficult when you do have relationships, whether it be within the sport or outside of the sport. I think it's really difficult to sometimes compartmentalize. Like I think it's not, we're human, and there is a crossover, and it's really hard, and you have to have understanding on those days that mentally we can't always be okay. And it's okay if you're not okay. And I think for me, just recently I had something going on in my life, and that was a pretty bad week of training for me. Like I really struggled with something that was going on in my life, and it had nothing to do with diving, but it's hard to compartmentalize that. And I think especially when, that's outside of the sport, and then in the sport, when you have, let's say you don't get along with your coach, or there's issues with a teammate, and, I mean, you're not really an athlete or a teammate if you haven't had issues with either your coach or teammate, because everyone's different. Everyone's going to be there. Now, is there a good way to handle it? For sure. But I think it's normal to have those issues. So when you have something that's so close to, someone that's so close to you, so when you're not getting along with someone that you train with every day, or someone that you are taking critique from every day, it can be challenging, and it's really, and that can be probably the hardest thing in the sport, I think, outside of, I guess, the mental game, like of actually, performing on the spot. But I think just knowing how to handle situations that maybe you haven't had the experience to go through yet. And so I've definitely had, I think everyone has, like, I've had issues with coaches in the past, and sometimes they've been resolved and sometimes they haven't. And learning how to almost, like, in those situations, it's almost like water off a duck's back. You just have to kind of let those things be, and not to let them happen, but you just have to be like, you know what, my main goal is to be good one day. So that doesn't mean that I don't stand up for myself, but I do have to decide where I'm going to put my energy. Am I going to be putting my energy in being angry or upset towards that, or am I going to just come and do what I need to do, and try to be better? And I think it can be a really hard thing to do, but it's the reality of a lot of athletes. And unfortunately, it really can ruin the sport for some athletes, I think. Unfortunately, there's coaches and teammates and stuff. If you don't have a good experience, it can really change your perception of the sport. And that's a sad thing, because the sport is meant to be fulfilling, and it's meant to bring goodness to your life, not the other way around.
Yeah, totally. And if I think of other athletes that I know, but in particular individual sports like yours, is that often the coach is giving constructive criticism, should I call it that they are correcting, they're giving you corrections, and you're not getting a whole lot of positive feedback. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
So
again, most of
it's,
the time, no.
yeah, you're seldom getting positive feedback. And I think it's learning to manage your expectations, that you're not going to get the stroking or the positive reinforcement from your coach. Yeah, I just think it really must be tough. And if there is that disconnect, how do you keep focused? How do you keep on track?
Right.
It's
I think
separating
one thing I will say
from...
is, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's just separating professional from personal, right? That it's not a
Right.
personal thing. It's just work is work there in that
Yeah.
situation.
I think something that I've learned over the years is that communication goes a long way. And if you can communicate, you can sort of work through any issue. But obviously the communication has to come from both sides. It can't be one-sided, otherwise it's like you're talking to a wall. So I think that's something that I've really strived to be better at. And I think obviously, like, I think you get better with it with age. And I think, unfortunately, as a young athlete, your opinions and your viewpoints and things like that maybe aren't taken as seriously because you're young. And some people don't find another person's opinion important because of that. But I think and especially when you say, I know I don't respond well to this. And if you can verbalize that in a respectful way and say, this is not going to help me become better, and they can take that constructively as well, because I think a coach athlete relationship is really criticism both ways. You don't go out to, the athlete never goes out to make someone a better coach or to criticize them to a point where you kind of forget who's the one that's meant to be criticizing. But I think that there is a learning curve for both sides, because each person is going to be very different from another. So so someone might be able to take the harsh criticism all day long and they're just like, whatever. And then there are others that don't like that and they don't respond well to that. And I think that's being able to help inform your coach, I guess, or just to find that balance between the two, especially if you know how you work. If you work better a certain way, you have to be able to tell them that. And
exactly.
they have to be
Jules,
willing
what
to
you're
listen.
saying is so important. And I just think I had the opportunity of coaching one of your very young divers today. And what you're talking about is self-awareness. Because if you do not have the self-awareness and you haven't discovered who you are, how you tick, what you like, what you don't like, you can't communicate effectively. And so you might not understand why you respond in a certain way. So that self-awareness, would you say that self-awareness has grown over the years for you as you've become where you are today, as you've gone through the ranks, let's say? Because I mean, at the moment you are competing in top 10 in the world, aren't you? Your highest rank has been top 10 or 9.
Yes. Yes, when it was a world competition, yes. My most recent was 7th, but not everyone in the world was there, so I would say 9 is my highest.
Okay, but do you agree self-awareness is absolutely key in the interpersonal relationships in getting you to where you need to be?
Yes, absolutely. I think that I've actually always had, I'd really strive to have good self-awareness because I know how important it is with any relationship in your life. And I think I've always had good self-awareness, but I haven't always had the courage to speak up about what I'm feeling. And as I've gotten older, that courage has come with that, which has been amazing because relationships have improved. And you learn how to say, this is what I need. And it's nothing against you as a person, but this is what I need. And if you can't give me that, then we're going to have a greater discussion of like what this means for us, kind of thing. So yeah, for sure. Self-awareness, and paying attention to those things is very important.
Yeah. And respect of those is so important. Jules, resilience is such a huge part of success in sport. So what role has resilience played in your Olympic journey? And how have you bounced back from setbacks or disappointments?
I think this is one of the things that I like to talk about most, just because again, it happens in all sports, but diving can be so humbling sometimes. I mean, you can be the best in the world, and the next day you can be the worst on the pool deck, and that's just the nature of the sport. And so it really can be humbling in that sense. And I think when you've had a bad day, to go home and feel, in a sense, shame and embarrassment when you shouldn't feel that way, but it's hard not to. I definitely think that um, as the years have gone by, I've learned how to handle those setbacks and those disappointments a little bit more. From a mental standpoint, from a physical standpoint, I think, if I'm being honest, it's one thing that I'm really looking forward to when it comes to retirement, because gosh, it can be so challenging. Like, it just can be so challenging to constantly have something niggling at you, or to, and I've been, and knock on wood, I've been sort of blessed that I haven't had something that's completely. I have had injuries, but nothing that has required surgery or anything. And I would almost argue those are the worst ones to have, because there's no real fix, and you just have to deal with the pain. And so that's been really challenging, because in those moments, you have to now learn and find a way to still train without training. And so that's where the mindset stuff comes in. And diving it is so mental, that you can do a lot of training without even doing a dive. And so, a lot of my teammates have struggled with this too. And so they'll sit out for the practice, but they'll be at the pool. They'll do, they'll watch video, they'll analyze film, they'll do their mental run through, so they can run through a dive without actually doing it on the board. So I think it teaches you over the years. Like, I definitely think I've gotten better at just trusting that, what my body's got it. Even if I have, I just took off right before Doha, which was in February this year. I had basically took off 6 months. I mean, I was doing very, very minimal because of an injury that I was facing. And when I got to Doha, I was like, let's just see how this goes, because I've had maybe a month and a half of real training. And I think that was the meet that I got ninth at, and I was like, okay, and I'll take this. I'll take this for now. And I think it taught me that you don't have to be in the pool. I mean, it's great if you can be, but you really don't have to. You can overcome whatever it is that you're facing.
Yeah, that's amazing. And the reality is, there's so many elements, are there? It's not just leaping on the board and diving into the water. There's a whole holistic approach to pulling that all together.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have to think as a international athlete, what are other challenges you face now? So you represent South Africa, you live in America. What are some of the challenges that you may have faced in the past, that you could even help the young up and coming Olympians to be? What would, yeah.
I think it's hard, because you're doing what's best for yourself, and sometimes it's like, at times I've felt selfish in my life, in the best way that you can be selfish, I think, because I've chosen, and I've chosen to do what I want to do, and that means I have to be 8,000 miles from, the people that need to support me. Like, I love supporting South Africa, but I'm still 8,000 miles from the people that I need to talk to every day, to, when I'm traveling. So that's just difficult. And then you have your family who don't not everyone in the family agrees with you being overseas. So it can be challenging. It can be, you just feel like you're being selfish, but you also know that, this is your life, and you have to fulfill it in the best way that you know how. And so, yeah, that's something that I've struggled with in the past, and I've had to really dig deep and be like, if this is what you want, then you have to be all in. And this is how I am being all in, is I'm fully committed and doing what I know to be best, which is to train in this country.
Yeah. And I think we had a discussion, I think it was the end of last year, and it's like, this is your final year of professional performing. So you're going to give it your absolute all. But the other thing as a professional athlete is there's an end to that, and then there's the what next. And I'm sure your mind is starting to think of the what next, and we don't need to discuss that, but it's real, isn't it?
It is. it's a constant thought, because I've never, every athlete, their final year of competing, they don't have to think about it until they have to think about it. So now I'm in that stage where I'm like, so the next time I take a break from diving, I'm not coming back. So it's a whole different world of, every time I've taken a break from diving, it's usually after a big competition. I take a solid week or two. I get to live like a normal human being, do whatever I want for those 2 weeks. But you, at the back of your head, you're like, I need to come back and be okay in the next, in 2 weeks' time, I need to be able to come on pool deck and get back to training. It's going to be a very different world walking into a retirement right after this Olympics.
Yeah. We will prepare for that. We'll have a plan.
We will.
Yes. And then I reckon, like, after we had that discussion about this is your final year, give it your absolute best. If you had to think of your highest accomplishments to date, would this year be right up there?
Yes, for sure. I think I feel like all the years of training have finally, even if this is all I did, and obviously that's not my goal, is not to just do what I've done this year, but even if that's all that I did, I think I have a lot to be proud of, and this is the years that I've put into, like, I can see some kind of payoff from what I've, the years and hours and sweat and tears and blood and whatever you want to call it. Like, I can feel the payoff and I can see it now. But I definitely think that being able to say that I'm going to my third Olympics, that was my goal from the beginning. I wanted to do 3. I didn't, you never know who's coming up behind you. You just don't, you never know. So you never sleep on your competition. I've always been really conscious of that. I'm always knowing that there are always people ready to take your place in any sport. And so I definitely didn't take this for granted. I didn't just assume that I would get this, but yeah, I think that's one of my biggest things, is I've really wanted to be a 3-time Olympian, because I think it's just a cool experience, and I'm a different age, like we've talked about, and it's just going to be a different world, I think, going into this one. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, fantastic. And Jules, the final question I have is, so those are your accomplishments on the diving board. And if we talk about the personal growth that you've achieved through performing as an elite sports person, you mentioned the word humility as one of the lessons that you've learned along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else? Maybe patience? You would have had to learn a bit of patience. Like,
yeah,
when injury comes, this too shall pass, and I will be back. Can you think of other ways that you may have grown on a personal level through this journey?
Patience is such a big one. I think that's one of the biggest, because in so many different ways it plays into, like, how I've grown. Like you said, the injury, you have to be patient. You have to let things go the way that they're going sometimes. And I think I've been in this for a long time, and so I've had to have a lot of patience and, like, wanting my time to come. And I think that's been fun, but it's been challenging, because you can see yourself do dives in practice, and you feel like, I know I can do this, and why doesn't it always happen in competition? And being patient and letting it happen when it needs to happen has been a big thing for me. I think I think the stamina, or the tenacity, is something that my mom always says that we have. It's like the Vincent tenacity that we have. She said that it comes from her father. I don't know. I've learned a lot about how my ability to keep going regardless of what's going on, and to do things that, like, sometimes I surprise myself when I've done something, like, oh wow, I'm actually, like, way more capable than I thought I was. So that's definitely been something that I've learned over the years. And then my faith, my personal faith, with God, and my faith in myself, and just in general, that's grown over the years too. I think I've learned to sort of, sometimes you just have to let things happen. And so I just learned that I'm going to have faith if something happens. My dreams, if they don't happen, that's okay. But the important part is having faith that they could happen. And so that's been something that's really big for me. And I think one of the biggest things for me as well is community, like all the communities that I've been brought into, I love, that's something that I absolutely love about the Olympics, is how unified people are. We all come from completely different parts of the world. We're all just so different in so many different ways, and I just love that everyone can come. We're all there for the same reason, but we're all so different, and there's a lot of joy, and I don't know, everyone's willing to work together at that moment. And so I really love that about sports in general, just having community and knowing that, you have people that support you, and regardless of what happens, you have people, there.
And Jules, you said that you're also different, yet there's a commonality. There's all that sacrifice, discipline, perseverance, resilience, all of that. That's like a common thread that links you all together, which is totally amazing. But I just wanted to say all the very best for the Olympics. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible experience and advice to people that are going to be listening to this. And I love working with you because you're one of the most humble people that I've ever met, but also probably the most disciplined. Really, like when I've listened to you and you've explained your structures and your programs and your goal setting, and really that is so inspiring. And those little people, those young people that you're coaching are truly blessed to have you.
That's sweet. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that.